Hi, everyone. Before COVID, 1 in 7 U.S. students was chronically absent, which is defined by missing more than 10% of the school days. Today, it's closer to 1 in 4, and the improvement is nearly stalled. That's according to the American Enterprise Institute's Return on Learn tracker, which found absenteeism fell less than 1 point last year. In roughly half of America's urban school districts, more than 30% of students missed at least 18 days of school last year. That's from RAND's latest American School District Panel Survey. Chronic absenteeism isn't fading, it's becoming a new normal. SchoolStatus, which is an organization that's been featured on the podcast several times, is about to release a report analyzing absenteeism trends from three academic years, starting in 2023 and going through 2026. Absenteeism is still a national concern, but we're starting to see signs of positive effects from intentional intervention. We're going to be talking about those issues with Dr. Kara Stern on today's episode of Teaching Matters.
Welcome to the Teaching Matters podcast, where we discuss all topics related to teaching and learning. Teaching Matters is produced by NPR affiliate WOUB Public Media in Athens, Ohio, in collaboration with the Barbara Gerald's Institute for Storytelling and Social Impact at Ohio University. Here is your host, Dr. Scott Titsworth, Professor of Instructional Communication in Ohio University's Scripps College of Communication.
Yes. Hi, Scott. Thank you so much for inviting me back. I'm glad to be here to talk to you about this important topic.
Kara, it's always great to have you on the podcast. You always bring such great information. And I think that, through the now 3 conversations that I'm having with you about absenteeism, it's clear that this is something that you're passionate about. And the work that SchoolStatus is doing is really trying to make sure that really school districts, teachers, parents all have the information about why attendance is so important, and you're trying to do great work to improve those. So thank you for, sort of being the person that brings this to the podcast. You're clearly an expert, and you bring great information every time you're on.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to be able to share it.
So let's start with talking about the fact that SchoolStatus sort of does an ongoing program of research looking at the evidence surrounding absenteeism in schools and what can be done about it. The last time that you were on the podcast, we talked about one of those reports, but there are several reports that have been released since we were together last, and that precedes the one that will be released at the beginning of the 26-27 academic year. So let's kind of hone in on those to set the stage for the new, what I think is going to be a really telling report that will be released in August. So can you start by talking about, let's focus on the mid-year report, because I think that may have been the first one that got released after the last time you were on the podcast. Can you sort of talk about the scope and the scale of the mid-year report and what it was that you were trying to learn through that analysis?
Yeah, absolutely. So for the mid-year report, we like to do, we sort of like to measure at the same points each year to look at how the year as a whole has gone the past year, and then look again in the middle of the year and see how it's going so far. And I think this is a really valuable thing to do because it's hard for districts to get up to the minute data that's national data. It's usually at least a year behind. So we like to be able to put this out so that everyone can see the direction that things are going. So the mid-year report, we put it out in February, I think. We looked at 146 school status attend districts. It was 1.17 million kids, and it was 3 years of data. As you just shared, Scott, the chronic absenteeism numbers are, they're not moving. They're moving in the right direction. They're not moving at the speed that we'd like to see it. They're really kind of slowing to a trickle. But the 146 districts that we looked at that are using SchoolStatus Attend have dropped below 20%. They're at 18.98% chronic absenteeism. And we saw that students were averaging 5.74 absences, which is down from 6.42 2 years ago. For me, sometimes those numbers, I like to have a really concrete way of thinking about it. So what that means is it's roughly 503,000 fewer missed instructional days across the sample. And one of the really powerful data points that we found in the mid-year report was that SED students, socioeconomically disadvantaged students, which was 48% of our sample, and which have been, the highest risk group all along for chronic absenteeism, they have improved every single year for 3 years. Their chronic absenteeism rate has gone from 25.85% down to 22.76, so almost 3 full percentage points. So that's a big drop. So those are really some of the headlines of the mid-year report.
I don't want to reduce the fact that when I started the podcast, I specifically chose a statistic about urban school districts to highlight in the teaser. So I don't want to assume that socioeconomically disadvantaged students are all in urban areas. That's not true. We know that. And
Right.
the same thing is true for homeless students. But obviously, rural versus urban can present different challenges for what it means for students getting to school. And I thought that the stats that I used at the beginning, really highlighted, some of the issues that are facing urban districts effectively. But if you think about the socioeconomically disadvantaged students, and also I would put into, maybe this question, the homeless students who were also part of the survey. Obviously, there's a lot of factors that can impact that student's ability to get to the classroom. Have you been able to discern what some of those factors are, or do you have hypotheses about what makes it more challenging for that particular group or those groups?
So I would say that what we are finding is that when you implement specific intentional practices around attendance, they are effective for every population of students. And when a student group is most at risk, when there is more consistent positive engagement, that group might move a little more quickly because it's a group that needs to be pulled back in even more. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah.
So I guess the analogy that I really like to think about is teaching. So if you have a student who's failed the course, you can't, as a teacher, let their family know for the first time after that failure, because that's something that's already happened. It's not something that you can prevent. A teacher is going to reach out at the first signs of distress, at a failed quiz, at some missed homework assignments, at some skipped classes, and they're going to say, "Hey, Mrs. Jones, what's going on with Timothy? Is he having trouble in class? I would love to see what we could do to get him back on track." So that early intervention is changing an outcome, right? And so 1,000% early intervention is what makes the difference across so many different points of education. It's no different for attendance. When families get outreach that is personal, that is warm, and that is early in the first month of the year, those families stay more engaged for the rest of the school year. When students who are beginning to show a pattern of absenteeism get a warm personal outreach at the 3 to 5 absence rate, they come back in much higher numbers. When that first outreach is positive and supportive, offers help and resources, it gets kids back in higher numbers than the second outreach and the third outreach. So the more that schools are putting into place the practice of reaching out early and reaching out warmly and positively with help and support, the more they are getting students back. And that is true for students who are not at high risk, but it is doubly true for students who are at quite high risk.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And because of those barriers that you mentioned, it's not enough to send a notification home saying your student has missed 6 days of school. Okay, well, how is that useful? But if you reach out and say, hey, how can we get your child back? What's going on that's preventing them? Then you're going to start getting answers.
Mhm.
Well, there's not a safe route to school. Well, we're having a laundry problem. Well, we're having some housing insecurity. We're having some food insecurity. Well, these are all issues that schools can help with if they know.
That makes sense. As you're thinking about the data, you mentioned that when you reach out warmly, I think that intuitively all the listeners would understand what you mean by that. But can you think of an example of how that framing of being warm in that initial reach out sort of is more impactful?
So I think if you think about absenteeism, if you think about it sort of historically, um, it's been a net negative, right? If you're not in school, you're not learning.
The
But
truancy
the
officer.
right,
Yeah.
but right, and so my brother actually once got picked up by a truancy officer. So I can tell you that it's that kind of approach, that kind of punitive, negative approach, isn't one that is rebuilding a connection to school. It's further severing a connection to school. So when a family gets a notification saying, your student has missed 6 days of school, no name, no nothing, it doesn't feel like a bridge to return. It feels like a distancing. And so to have outreach that is personal, that has the student's name,
Mhm.
that has an offer of help, that has a specific name and number to reach out to get that help, that has some resources that are available to parents. That is a warm outreach as opposed to a notification that's really a cold outreach.
Yeah.
And what's the one that you're going to respond to? If it's your child who is having trouble getting to school for one reason or another, are you going to feel moved to help? Feel moved to sort of shove your kid back to school with the notification, or are you going to feel moved to help your kid get back to school with the warm outreach?
Right. You're probably delving into this with some of the statements you've made already, but one of the other reports that was released since the last time that we talked was your family engagement survey, which I assume you're kind of leaning into already in some of your answers. Or were there other highlights that came out of that report that is sort of salient to what we've been talking about?
Yeah, there were. One of them is that there are specific windows that it's better to reach out to parents. Mostly those are the drop off and pick up windows of school. And also I thought one of the really interesting findings was that, on average, families reply to a text message in 11 minutes. And that's faster than most people respond to a work email.
Yeah.
And I think there's a little bit of a misnomer that families don't care, they're not responsive, but they are responsive when the outreach is getting to them on the right channel, in the right tone, and at the right time.
That makes sense to me. I know that I respond to texts a lot quicker than I do emails across my inbox. So it
Right. And think about if you're a parent who is in a work situation where you don't have a desk and you can't step away and open up a computer, or you can't take a phone call. Everyone's got their phone in their back pocket, and it's easy to reply to a text. It's not easy to take a phone call, and it's not always easy to read email.
Mhm. Are there other examples of outreach that then takes the next step? Like, I mean, I'm assuming that this may have not have been included in the data that you collected, but from your background and experience with this matter, once the family reaches out and says, okay, we've received this message that was, received well by us, it had resources that we could draw upon, and then they they take that active step to make a connection with the school to get access to those resources. That follow-on communication, I'm sure, is just as important. It might be outside of the scope of your data and your reports, but what advice would you give districts about, okay, family X that may or may not have some logistical challenges going on with their circumstances to get their student into the classroom, has reached out, and that's a good sign. What is that we need to do now with them to try to have that impact the attendance of their child?
Well, I think, first of all, I've talked to a lot of people in student services around the country, and they are incredible human beings doing incredible work, giving everything to getting every student they possibly can back in school. They are really attendance heroes. And I think that once a family has shared what the barrier is, the important next step is to try to figure out a way to get the family past the barrier. And there are a lot of different kinds of solutions, but it becomes about partnership. We're going to work together on this. We're going to keep you informed. We're going to try to make the situation better. But I also think that there are other ways to help the student repair, because I think when you've stopped coming to school, it's quite hard to start coming back. And things like a CICO, a check-in, check-out person who is going to greet the student in the morning, check in with them at the end of the day, that kind of thing really helps a student feel like there is somebody at school who cares about their presence, who knows them and cares. And that brings kids back to school. That's school connectedness is a good way to talk about that. And when a child is chronically absent, they are not connected to school. So finding a way to tighten that connection is really important. But I would go back actually before that warm outreach to say that I think that a really important part of the communication work of attendance is universal communication. And not assuming that families understand the importance of coming to school every day, because I don't think that they necessarily do, especially when you take, say, kindergarten, where in many states, I think more than half of states even, kindergarten is optional. And so that means coming to school is optional. Well, once you've signed on to be in kindergarten, you really need to be there every day so you can continue to advance. And I think we could all be doing a better job of educating families about why it's so important, and that missing a couple of days a month actually adds up to lost instructional time and being behind in your reading, being behind in your math. Actually, there's a line all the way to graduation. Mm-hmm. So actually, I would start with those universal communications.
Kind of sticking on this frame before we jump into some of the other reports. One of the data trends that I've always found fascinating in the information that you've brought to me is the trend about absenteeism as a student ages through their matriculation in the K-12 systems. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but basically attendance gets worse as they get older in many cases. And what are you starting to see about, I think I've asked you a version of this question before, but if we know that there are more challenges as a student starts to get older, and we know that when we have early intervention, that seems to have good effect sizes on attendance based mm-hmm. upon the data that you've shared before, are you starting to zero in on what we can do with those students that are in the high school grades that maybe are missing at higher rates than they did when they were younger?
Yeah, I think that is where absenteeism reduction strategy meets program, right? And so I think that I agree with you. I find the whole sort of the pattern of absenteeism a really fascinating one and really important, that it's high in pre-K and K, and then kids get into the groove with school. They're really well known in elementary. They are coming to school steadily in fifth grade, fourth grade, fifth grade. They're really showing up. And then it takes a nosedive in sixth grade, and it just is a straight downward slope to high school. And I think that it's important to put in place all of the kinds of absenteeism reduction steps that we know are working, but also to understand that you can predict that this is what's going to happen. And since you can predict it, you can also start thinking about what kind of programming you can put into place that's going to attract your students back.
Right.
I talked to a director of communications at Picos Barstow Toya district in Texas, which is a little district. And she's created a student influencer program that's only for high school students. And they do all of the Instagram posting, TikTok, all of that for the school under her supervision. And it's become a competitive thing. Kids are excited about it. And attendance is one of the things that you need to be able to show that you can do in order to be in the influencer program. Like, that's the gateway.
There are so many things about that that's really interesting, besides the fact that, students are, talking to each other, which is in some ways the most effective communication that you can have. But then to actually turn that into what is becoming a valid career, being an influencer, to get them skills in doing that, I think that's fascinating. So,
and I think that whole piece about why am I going to school? How is it useful to me? It's not like it has nothing to do with real life. Well, this is a perfect way to build in something that really actually means something to teenagers in their real life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's switch gears just a little bit. I know that one of the other reports that SchoolStatus released was a report analyzing data from state data sources, where you were trying to understand sort of the effects of having a more intentional strategy in terms of how it influences attendance. So what were some of the findings of that report?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting report. So we looked at state reported data on 89 districts. It was 500,000 students in 9 states over 2 years, 2 school years. So year 0, year 1, year 2. And this was independent of the 146 district sample. And we looked at, it's the same attendance improvement program, looking at monitoring kids early in the year, making the outreach personal, removing administrative burden so staff have time for that outreach, investing in family trust ahead of crisis, that early outreach. And then the last part was committing over a span of years, not just a semester. So in year 1, the average improvement was 18%, and 84% of the districts experienced improvement in their attendance. And in year 2, the average improvement was 36%. With 96% of the districts achieving improvements. And what it really showed is that attendance reduction is a system, and systems build on themselves.
Yeah. I think that's so important, because when we started the podcast, you and I were talking about the fact that attendance and chronic absenteeism is still a necessary concern for all of us, that we should be paying attention to it. And what I hear you saying throughout this discussion and talking about the data that you've observed is that we are starting to see places where we're sort of changing the curve a little bit. And what you just said is so important, because it's not one magic bullet that's going to change the curve and make it, flatten. It's going to be a lot of systemic efforts across different age groups, different school settings, et cetera, that's really going to make a difference. And that sustained intentionality seems like that's very important for districts, but also state systems to really start paying attention to.
Yes, I think absolutely. Absolutely. It's not one and done. You have
Yeah.
to persevere.
Yeah, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And
Right, exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
So I know that you and I are talking in mid-July right now, and SchoolStatus will be releasing a new report, if I'm remembering correctly, sort of the late August timeframe. And so we can't really talk about the details of that report right now, but maybe if you could give just sort of a snapshot of what the questions were that you had going into that report. And of course, if you want to tease anything, this will come out a little bit before the report will likely, but it might gain some interest for you for people to go look at it.
Sure. So, as I mentioned earlier, we like to take a look at the trends that we've seen over, the most recent entire school year. And we like to do this this summer after the school year has ended so that districts can have access to more updated data about what we're seeing, what patterns we're seeing in attendance and in absenteeism. So I just started looking through the data recently, and I'm still wading through it a bit. We're interested to see, are we seeing the same kinds of predictable patterns across the grade bands that we have seen in the past? Are we continuing to see improvement across all the student demographic groups, including homeless students? One thing that has been new for us this year is that our data team, which they are so amazing, they figured out that in the first 60 instructional days of school, they could predict with something like 76% accuracy who was going to be chronically absent by the end of the year.
Wow.
So that means that by Thanksgiving, you have a list of students that require immediate outreach so that you can begin intervening in time to catch them instead of when you get that chronic report at the end of the year. So we're really eager to see what's going to come of that data.
That sounds really important because as anybody that, either works in K-12 or is connected to it in some way like you and I are, that there's a cohort of students that sort of, get the end of the year itis that goes on. And then the big question is, how do you get them caught back up and ready to start the next academic year? And if you can prevent that from happening, so that there is that sort of continuity of learning, despite the fact that the summer months are in there, that could be so important for keeping students on progress and on grade. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that group of kids, that, schoolitis group of kids that you just mentioned, when everyone starts back, that's where they should start.
Yeah, absolutely. Kara, I think that we've covered all the big topics. Just so you know, in the text accompanying the podcast, I'll have a more general link to SchoolStatus so that listeners can review not just the new report that's coming out, but the ones that you discussed in this podcast and as well the previous ones. But I just want to end by, you are one of the most you're a strong advocate for attendance. You always have been when you've been on the podcast. What's your last message sort of to teachers and district administrators about why paying focused attention to attendance is so important to the success of their students?
You really can't learn if you're not in school. And not only is it about learning, but it's about connecting with other humans. It's your social and emotional development. It's your readiness, preparedness to be out in the world. And so understanding that communication with families about having their students in school is just as important as whatever instruction you're delivering in that classroom.
Very good. I think that, with you being on for the third time now, you're the record holder guest of Teaching Matters podcast.
Oh my gosh.
Congratulations. Yeah.
I feel so honored.
You should. And that means that you're now committed to being sort of a regular guest. So we'll look forward to
with pleasure
having you back on again. Thank you for bringing this information, and I think that readers and listeners and viewers will enjoy being able to look at the actual reports. They're always very well done and very consumable, despite the fact that there's so much rich data inside them. You always are able to find the important nuggets of information. Your team does a really great job of visually laying out what is really complex data. So congratulations on that. And I hope that you have a great rest of your summer, and we'll talk again when time gives us a reason to get back together.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Scott. All the best to you.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening and watching Teaching Matters. This is the first episode of our, I think, 7th season now. We have some big changes underway with new staff members and a new studio for me, which is exciting. But we have some great guests lined up for the rest of the fall already. And so we hope that you continue tuning in. Special thanks to Trinity Sweet and April Koska, who were sort of helping out getting these first few episodes off of the ground for the new season. We appreciate your time in being a viewer or a listener. And of course, if you have questions, comments, or thoughts about topics that would be relevant for the other listeners and viewers of the podcast, please feel free to reach out by emailing us at teachingmatterspodcast@ohio.edu. That's all one word and all lowercase. Thanks for watching and have a great day.